The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Ted Rowlands in for Vinnie Politan. The subject of our investigation is a case and trial filled with sex, lies, BDSM, and extreme violence. An alleged twisted plan and the target, a mother of a 4-year-old child. Here's the story.
The walls may be closing in on Brendan Banfield, the man on trial accused of killing his wife Christine and another man in what prosecutors describe as an elaborate plot that involved planning, deception, and a rape fantasy. Investigators believe he did it all with his au pair, Juliana Magalhaes, who testified against him. She claims that Banfield, a former IRS special agent, devised this complex scheme, posing as Christine on a fetish website and luring an innocent man, Joseph Ryan, to the house under the guise he would get to play out a BDSM fantasy with her. But it was a trap. The au pair says she and Banfield killed both Christine and Ryan, the unsuspecting man, in their Virginia home, shooting him and stabbing her to death, with Banfield's young daughter in the basement the whole time. It was all, seemingly, in order to get rid of his wife and begin a new life with the au pair. Banfield is now facing the possibility of life behind bars.
And that possibility seems to be growing as this trial continues. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. Cody, the big witness here, of course, is the au pair. She flipped, took the stand. What did she say?
Well, yeah, Ted, we expected bombshell testimony from the au pair, Juliana Magalhaes, given that she has that sweetheart deal from the prosecution that allows her to get out of jail on time served once this trial is over. Now, she told the court it was Brendan Banfield who orchestrated everything. Take a listen to her walk through the sequence of events at the house that day.
And he proceeded to go upstairs, and I just followed him upstairs to the master bedroom.
Who opened the bedroom door?
Brendan.
Did you go inside the bedroom?
Yes.
And what did you see when you went inside the bedroom?
When we first get into the bedroom, I could see that the bed we have in the master bedroom was kind of tall. And so from my point of view, all I could see was like Joe, at the moment I knew it was Joe, like on top of Christine, in a way I would only describe holding her down. And that was my first view as soon as I get into the bedroom.
Were you able to see Christine at all at that point?
At that point, no.
Did anyone say anything when the two of you went into the bedroom?
Yeah, when I got to the bedroom, Brendan said, he yelled, "Police officer." And Christine's first reaction, that was the first time I heard she say anything at that point. And she yelled back at Brendan, saying, "Brendan, he has a knife." And yeah, that's when Brendan first shot Joe.
Did you see Joe before he was shot?
Yeah.
What did he look like when he saw Brendan?
Shocked.
Did anyone say anything?
If anyone said anything?
Yeah, did anyone say anything in the room at that point?
Yeah, because Brendan ran to Christine. She was still on the floor, and I think that point she had seen me, and she said she had asked what to do to Brendan. I think regarding to that he shot Joe. And she said my name. She told me, Juliana, call 911.
And what did you do?
I called 911.
And what happened after you called 911?
At that point, Joe was already shot, so that's the sound in the background. And Brendan looks at me and just, in a way, for me, like to hang up the call.
Did he tell you? Did he say, Juliana, hang up the call?
No, he did not.
How did he communicate to you?
A gesture.
And what gesture did he make?
This.
And so what did you do after he made that gesture?
I hung up the phone, the phone call.
What, if anything, happened next?
Next, he was on top of Christine. Joe was laying there, and they had for me to grab a towel. When I was bringing him the towel, he got on top of her, and that's when I first saw him stab her with a knife.
Where in her body was he stabbing her?
Her neck.
So, Ted, it'll be left up to the jury to decide whether her testimony can be trusted or not after that full walkthrough she just gave.
Yeah, and boy, that was something else. Cody's going to be with us through the hour. We've been focusing a lot on the Banfield's house and how investigators believe that Brendan and Juliana carried out this plan. Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft is there in Northern Virginia covering the trial for us and is showing us now the layout, just who was there before and during the brutal murders.
The Banfield home sits at the end of this cul-de-sac. When Brendan Banfield arrives, he pulls up and he sees Joseph Ryan's car in the driveway, parked next to Christine. He knows it's now time to execute his plan. He has taken precautions. When you look around this neighborhood, you can see that the homes are really close by. So what could be an issue? Noise. Well, he had a solution for that. He recently had all of the windows on the home replaced with triple pane windows. We heard a window salesman talk about this in court. This means neighbors would not be able to hear Christine if she screamed. They had also hid her phone, so she couldn't call for help. They hid her phone in the kitchen. Now, this is all according to the prosecutor's theory. When Brendan gets to the home, he is greeted by Juliana. They enter the home through the downstairs basement. Also with them is the little girl, Brendan's 4-year-old daughter. So they leave her downstairs, and then Brendan and Juliana go upstairs. They wait, and then they hear spanking. This is according to Juliana's testimony. Brendan and Juliana go upstairs. They go into the bedroom. They see that Joseph Ryan is on top of Christine. So it's that bedroom right up there. Brendan Banfield pulls out his gun. He shoots Joseph Ryan. Juliana said the look on his face was shock. Then Brendan, according to Juliana's testimony, goes over and begins to stab Christine. Juliana notices that Joseph Ryan is still moving. She pulls out her gun and fires once. The shot is fatal.
And that brings us to our first question in our investigation, and that is, what does the area outside of the Banfield house reveal? Let's bring in our guest for the hour. For this segment, retired police commander, author, and host of the podcast Gardens of Evil Inside the Zion Society Cult. It's Mike King and trial attorney Marlo Greer, both with us. All right, let's start with you, Mike. The outside of the house, what does it tell us? And also factor in the new windows.
You know, Ted, I almost find myself thinking about the things that it doesn't tell us. It doesn't show signs of forced entry into the house. It doesn't show any damage to windows or the door locks or anything else. I think it's also kind of interesting to think about all of the behaviors leading up to this. That, number one, the front door is unlocked, and it has to be unlocked by a mobile device. And that mobile device happens to be Christine's mobile device. That's really interesting because of the digital trail that it leaves. It also is really interesting to me that the au pair parks in the cul-de-sac rather than in the driveway where she normally parks to make it appear like there's nobody home, because this could have potentially flagged Ryan off when he pulled up and saw a vehicle in the driveway. That, to me, is one of those really interesting behavioral things outside of the home. The fact that when Brendan pulls up, he stops at the mailbox out front, and you can see that driveway as we were looking at the imagery coming into that area. That's a pretty long approach there. And so he has now a lot of ground to cover. If he's in a hurry to find out who's in his house and why this threat is inside of his home, I'm having a hard time seeing. Now, a police officer might pull away and approach and take advantage of cover and concealment and other kinds of things. But a husband returning to his home because there's a threat of an intruder inside, that I found interesting. And then to not go through the front door, but to go over, talk to the au pair, and then go through the basement door. And again, how long did they sit down there and listen? We haven't heard about CCTV cameras and other things from neighbors, but all of that starts telling me more about what isn't being said than what is being said by what's happened outside that home.
Yeah, great observations. Marlo?
I agree as far as what is not there versus what is there. I was going to make a joke that the outside of the home really tells us that, that family had money. Other than that, what's really interesting to me about the outside of the house is where the doors are and where you would normally enter. If you're coming home and you want to scare this intruder, you think you're saving your wife, you wouldn't bring your 4-year-old child into the basement and put the child in the basement, especially if the child's au pair is there. You would give the child to the au pair or never have the au pair take the child out of the car and have them drive away. I mean, there's no circumstances under which I'm leaving my 4-year-old child, let alone my 14-year-old who's sitting quietly on TikTok upstairs. I'm not going to bring her into a house where I think there's an intruder. And the fact that they went into the basement, it seems to me that if they're pulling up, especially if they're pulling up at the mailbox, which we just saw, that it's much easier to enter through the front door. And if you don't go through the front door and you're trying to be quiet, is there a side door to the garage? Do you go in the garage? These are all things that normal human beings would do. Or a normal human being would call 911 before coming home upon an intruder.
Mike, the reality is that the investigators that were tasked with this case were split. There were more than one of these detectives early on and for months who believed this was this was self-defense. They believed this story. How? Do you think his law enforcement background helped him in terms of getting the trust of the detectives tasked with finding the truth?
Yeah, I actually think, Ted, that it both helped and hurt him, because I think there was a sense of arrogance that because of his law enforcement training and an understanding of some of the techniques and the fantasy process that this guy went through, if in fact all of this proves to be true, that he went through planning this out and working through each mechanical piece of this from beginning to end. And we know from testimony that he thought about a hitman and he thought about different avenues of pulling this off. So there's an incredible amount of fantasy that goes in the mind or into the process when someone's putting something like this together. And if they're a law enforcement officer, there's also a sense of arrogance that you might know a little more than the investigators. You might have a little better edge on what they would look at and be dissuaded by. And we might believe, just based on some of the evidence, that law enforcement was dissuaded or thought that he was just the grieving husband. And we saw some examples of that when they allowed him to wash his hands right after. And you can see the compassion of some police officers. But that doesn't mean that they didn't have him in the crosshairs from the beginning, and they were just seeing if all the pieces would fall into place, because you're only going to get one run at this thing, and you want to make sure it's right.
Yeah, and here we are. He's sitting at that defense table, so it didn't work out. Mike and Marlo are going to stick around. Coming up, Brendan Banfield's drive from the McDonald's in the spotlight. What does it reveal? We'll talk about that next.
And this car creeping in here, that's Mr. Banfield's car, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The Court TV podcast will return.
At some point, while you were working for the Banfield family, did your relationship with the defendant change?
Yes.
How did it change?
It became sexual, physical relationship.
And do you recall when the relationship changed?
It was August 2022.
There's the au pair talking about the relationship. In order to pull off this plot, Brendan Banfield and the au pair, because they were waiting, right, for word that there was this intruder, Joseph Ryan, they had to leave the house, but they also had to kind of stick around. She was supposedly going to the zoo. Brendan had to rush home, so he was supposed to be at work, but he didn't go to work. He went to the local McDonald's, and he hung out there, just waiting for the call. That's what prosecutors say. Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft is in Northern Virginia covering it, and she's going to now show us a bit about this McDonald's, the drive back to the house, what it would have looked like.
Brendan Banfield left his home on the morning of February 24th, 2023, and he came here. He didn't go to work. This is the McDonald's in Herndon, Virginia, and it's not far from his home. You see him on surveillance video. He's going through the drive-thru once, then he goes through the drive-thru again. He orders something, then he decides to park his car. He goes inside the McDonald's. We see him go into the bathroom. And then at 7:37 a.m., he receives a phone call from his au pair. The McDonald's surveillance video shows him talking on the phone and then leaving the restaurant. According to the prosecutor's theory, Brendan's plan to get rid of his wife was now in motion. The call from Juliana was his signal to drive back home because Joseph Ryan, the unsuspecting man who thought he had agreed to have sexual relations with Christine, violent sexual relations, had arrived at the home. When you take a look around this area, it's residential, a little bit commercial. It's kind of a bedroom community from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not far from here, so a lot of people who live here commute back into Washington, D.C. According to prosecutors, this whole thing was a setup. Brendan needed to look like he was leaving for work, but yet be close enough to his house to return home quickly and catch Joseph Ryan in the act, attacking his wife. Doing the drive myself, it's not far, about 6-7 minutes away.
All right, that brings us to our next question in our investigation, and that is, what does the drive from the McDonald's reveal? Still with us, retired police commander Mike Kane and trial attorney Marlo Gurr. All right, Marlo, this guy goes to the McDonald's 2 times through the drive-thru, goes into the bathroom for 7 minutes. Nobody goes into the McDonald's bathroom for 7 minutes unless it's an emergency, and that doesn't take 7 minutes. So what does it tell you? What's your answer to this whole drive, this idea, and how suspicious it is that he doesn't go to work, goes to McDonald's?
Well, I mean, either he really wanted an Egg McMuffin or the McMuffin, gave him quite the tummy ache, because obviously 7 minutes in the bathroom, I think it was really helpful when somebody else went in the bathroom and then came out. So we saw that today in testimony where he goes in the bathroom, he's still in the bathroom, someone else comes in, goes to the bathroom and leaves. So obviously we're talking about a long time in the bathroom. Defense is probably going to say something along the lines of, he went in there just to speak to her because he's going to admit that he was having an affair. But I think if they go there, the jury's really going to say, why would he do that? Why would he leave the car? And I think it's going to be difficult. And I thought this prosecutor did a good job at using, provocative words, right? She talked about him creeping up, right? And so that was really interesting. I thought that she used that word to just get across what he was doing and what they think that he was doing. So obviously, this drive and his behavior at that McDonald's, how long he is in there, what he is doing, is really suspect. And I think that will come across to the jury.
Mike King, no cameras in a bathroom, but law enforcement would know that if he sat down and ate his Egg McMuffin, he'd be on surveillance. Your overall thoughts on the whole McDonald's pit stop?
Well, I thought the two runs through the drive-in through window, which I hadn't picked up on before until tonight, is really intriguing because, again, he's trying to have a reason to hang out there. Then he heads into the McDonald's. And both of those really struck me as interesting. I guess I don't get as hung up on how much time he may have or may not have spent in the bathroom. I've sat in a lot of restrooms waiting for someone at the airport that seems to live in there. So I guess I'm going to cut him some slack there, Ted. But what I do think is really intriguing is the behaviors at the store, at the restaurant, where he's hanging around. He's clearly trying to buy some time, and he's getting some CCTV time as well. And I think that's pretty intriguing. There was something else that happened in this segment tonight that really caught my attention that I haven't picked up on before. And that was that when Juliana is asked on the witness stand about her relationship with Brendan, that's the first time I've seen, even when she was describing the homicides, that she actually wiped a tear.
Yeah, she got emotional talking about the moment when they shot and killed Joseph Ryan. Obviously, she's had time to reflect if she's telling the truth that, and this is a totally innocent person. Marlo, the McDonald's stopover, it's another piece of this puzzle. Mike kind of hit on it earlier, where you have this law enforcement guy that thinks he's cooked up the perfect plan. He's got all these different details down to where am I going to go during this waiting period? Well, I'll go to the McDonald's over there. And but in its totality, it comes across as being absolutely suspicious.
I think it does. And Mike, I think that whenever you go to the airport, you might want to bring some Tums if your friends are in the bathroom for that long. I do think it's suspicious, right? And as a woman, I can spend more time in the bathroom than a man does. And so I think it does just, going through the drive-through, going in, CCTV time. The other thing that I noticed that I thought was interesting about the testimony that we just replayed was that she started to say "we" when they asked her a question about the master bedroom and the bed. And she stopped herself when they asked about the bed, and she said, well, and then she kind of rolled it back and talked about it. So you could tell that she really anticipated that they were going to be the we, and it was their master bedroom. So I found that interesting, that little slip there. But again, they're not disputing that he was sleeping with the au pair. So
yeah, and after Christine was dead, those two did shack up in the master bedroom where she was murdered. Let's get a break. Thank you, Marla, for joining us. Mike's going to stick around still to come. What does the blood evidence reveal?
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
I'm Ted Rowlands in for Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the alleged murder plot of Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan. It's culminated in a high-profile trial involving an affair, an intricate alleged plot, and a rape fantasy gone wrong. Here is the story.
The trial of Brendan Banfield, a former IRS special agent, centers on an alleged murder plot prosecutors describe as calculated and grotesque. Prosecutors say he concocted and executed the elaborate scheme in February of 2023, killing his wife, Christine, and another man, Joseph Ryan, inside their Virginia home. They say Banfield orchestrated the killings to conceal an affair with the family's Brazilian au pair, Juliana Magalhães. They say Banfield impersonated his wife on a fetish website, luring Ryan to the home under the guise of a sexual encounter. According to the au pair's testimony, Banfield shot Ryan and stabbed Christine while staging the scene as a home invasion. But big questions remain, including whether the jury will believe the testimony of the au pair and her evolving story, and whether DNA evidence presented at trial will be convincing. Brendan Banfield, if found guilty, is facing life behind bars. He's pled not guilty.
Let's bring in Core TV field reporter Cody Thomas. Cody, what did we hear about Brendan and Juliana's clothes and specifically shoes?
Well, Ted, we heard there was blood on their clothes, blood that belonged to the victims, but that raises questions about whether they were rendering aid or whether Brendan actually stabbed Christine. Take a listen to a detective testifying about this on the stand.
It's going to be on Mr. Banfield's blue jeans.
What did you observe about these pants?
They had blood stains on them.
All right. Any particular staining patterns that you observed?
There was the blood stains on the knee area, and then there was a particular stain that someone pointed out, and they requested for me to submit that to the lab.
Tell me about that stain. Was it different than the staining on the knees?
Most of the stains that you saw on the pants were like almost like smears, smudges, like they came in contact with blood. This was droplets.
All right. Were there more droplets on the pants?
Yes.
But this was the area that was selected for testing?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me about this red circle.
This is on the back of the jeans. It'd be to the left of center, just below the belt line or close to being in the belt line.
Almost 138. Are these the shoes that were collected from Mr. Banfield?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you make any observations about what was on those shoes?
There was staining on the shoes, on the tops, but there's also staining on the bottom and into the treads.
What do we have here?
This would be Juliana's left shoe and sock.
Is this the right shoe and sock?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you observe blood on the shoes and socks?
There was blood on the shoes. On the shoes, it was primarily around the soles, around the edges of the soles and underneath the shoe. On the socks, there was red staining.
And here we have the bottom of the left shoe, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me about your observations on this shoe with regards to the location of the blood.
Blood was towards the toe area. A lot of it was towards the toes. You can also see that the blood went up inside the tread.
So, Ted, that's clearly a lot of blood, and particularly on the soles of Juliana's shoes. It seems like she was walking in puddles of it.
Yeah. They leaned into it in the opening statements, and they're going to, I guarantee you, in the closing, saying it's not just the au pair, it's also the blood. Concentrate on that. That takes us to our question here. First question of this segment. What does the blood evidence actually reveal? Let's bring in, still with us, retired police commander Mike King, and joining us now, criminal defense attorney Joseph Tully, who's in San Francisco. Joseph, welcome to you. Your take on the significance of the blood and how the state claims it really does bolster their case. It's not that obvious, though.
Sure. So the state just has to prove that what the defense is saying or what Banfield's story was to police is not accurate, that the blood evidence does not support it. So really, the blood evidence for the defense to actually work has to be that Ryan showed up and was stabbing the wife and was shot. The blood evidence doesn't show that. The blood evidence more supports manipulation, that this was a killing. It supports Juliana's testimony that Ryan was shot and then the wife was stabbed, and that the bodies were then manipulated to give the appearance that Ryan was the one stabbing the wife. However, the blood evidence does not support that.
Mike?
Well, Ted, I think a couple of things that stood out to me as I looked at it is there are different types of blood and evidence on those Levi's, and from what I've understood, on the body and on Brendan. So we have to look at the differences between that fine misted tiny little dot that sometimes comes from things like arterial spray, something that's being delivered with force, almost like a painter when they're shooting with an air gun, paint on the wall versus a guy dragging a brush across it. And I think that's really what we're seeing the differences here on, is we're seeing droplets that suggest that the blood was airborne and then delivered onto the pan. So it's kind of like flinging that same paintbrush ideology and saying, hey, the paint is landing on the clothing versus being sprayed or misting in the air and landing on it versus being rubbed onto the pan. And so each of those, combined with the testimony that's given or the statement at the time of this crime, is going to be the thing that really says, no, that makes no sense at all, and it's more in line with some kind of an act that forced that blood to be propelled onto the clothing rather than wiped onto the clothing.
Joseph, from a defense standpoint, hey, I rendered aid. My wife had been stabbed. Of course I've got blood all over me because I jumped on her to try to stop the bleeding and I just couldn't. Isn't that a viable defense? And maybe some flicked off when I was off of my own body during this process.
I don't think it's a viable defense, but I do think that it's the only defense that they have. They have to, defense here has to stick with the story that Banfield told police the day of the killings. So yes, it would be a defense that, look, I'm rendering aid. I have blood on me. There's blood everywhere. And weird things happen during times of crisis. You can have blood from rendering aid, flail your hands and get it in a weird place, or, just a lot of unpredictable things can happen in emergency situations. So really what's important to me is which version of the events, the prosecution or the defense, does this blood evidence support? And here, to me, it quite plainly supports the prosecution.
Mike, the blood, it is such a different lens that jurors have once they've listened to Juliana's testimony, the au pair, and they put her on early, which I thought was brilliant. You put her on, she tells her story, and now everything that you are witnessing as a juror comes through that lens. Does it match her testimony? And rather than bring this blood evidence up first, they bring her up really early. And now as a juror, I would argue, it fits. Your thoughts on that they have sort of a playbook before they even see some of this crucial evidence?
Well, I think that's really one of the strong suits to criminal cases if they're put on properly. And I'm talking from the cop perspective. The counselor here may have a different opinion, but the thing that I think is so important is that we don't try to convict on a single form of evidence, her testimony or her eyewitness account, but that there are forensic pieces of evidence that back that up. There are digital trails that back that up. There's physical evidence that backs it up. And of course, the combination of circumstantial that says, holy cow, how can you have all these things that fit this picture and not convict? And so I think that's what's going to be so powerful about this case. And I really was surprised but thrilled that they put her on quickly, because she was kind of the linchpin in this thing that everybody was worried about. And she got up, and now they can build around that. And you can either believe her or not, but it all will start making sense.
Yeah, and she did come across believable. Every witness that gets up there, it's human nature to try to minimize your involvement. I mean, she did a lot of, it was Brendan's idea. Believe it. But the play-by-play, the important, here's what we did next, here's what we did there, that is what really, I think she was telling the truth, because, to your point, Mike, it is lining up now with the rest of the evidence at hand. Let's get a break. When we come back, big thanks to Mike King. Enjoy your weekend, sir. Joseph's going to stick with us. Coming up next, what is Brendan Banfield's defense?
I was able to see him stabbing her.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
They offered you a trial unless you testified against Brendan.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay. And you didn't feel very good about going to trial, correct?
My lawyers never expressed any concerns relating going to trial. They were very confident.
Okay. How did you feel?
I feel as any other person would feel going to trial. Being in a situation like mine, I don't think people feel very happy about it.
The case against Brendan Banfield, they were dark today. They'll be back at it on Tuesday as the Commonwealth of Virginia continues to present evidence. And then it's going to be time for the defense. Let's bring back Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. What has Brendan Banfield's defense attorney said in terms of a defense in court?
Well, Ted, Banfield's defense hasn't specified the type of defense they plan to put on, but we heard during openings that they told the jury they should not trust the au pair's testimony. Take a listen to this.
All they want is to get you in this case. They want me to say things that aren't true. They want me to say things that I did that aren't true. They offered me a misdemeanor. As the case went on, it became very clear that they wanted him so badly that they were willing to do anything. They made offers, not as good as a misdemeanor, but as time went on, for a manslaughter, suspended time, but she had to testify against Brendan. You'll hear there were at least 4 or 5 times during that year leading up to Brendan Banfield being charged where they came to her, they went through her attorney, and they offered that deal that she now stands to have taken. The Commonwealth used her for their case. I understand the situation that she's in, and I understand the fact that she's away from home and she's young and she's dependent on people, and she's also dependent on the Commonwealth. And they've put her in this situation. And she's accepted it gladly, and I'm sorry to say, many people would. But it's the devastation that causes when you ask for that kind of testimony to be included in your case.
And Ted, even with that, we still have to wait and see what tale the defense may weave about what they allege really happened at the house that day.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as this works its way through. Let's now head to our final question. That brings us right to it. And that's pretty simple. What will Brendan Banfield's defense be? We've got a couple great defense lawyers with us that are going to help us answer that question. Trial attorney Robert Hilla is joining us, and still with us, criminal defense attorney Joseph Tully still with us as well. If this were to have worked, if you go back in time, Robert, it looked pretty good for Brendan. He had a couple detectives believed his story, and then they arrest the au pair. They don't arrest him. She sits in jail for a while. For this to have worked, then they would have needed the jury to believe that Christine was into this rape fantasy things and she ordered this Joseph Ryan to the house. Things have changed. What do you think the defense is going to be at the end of the day? What's the closing argument going to look like?
Well, I'm not sure that they have much choice on this. I mean, I think the first thing they did, which they have to do, is kind of attack the veracity of the au pair and say, look, you take her out of the equation. What do you have to show that the defendant did this? Because one of the difficulties in just saying the state hasn't proved the case beyond a reasonable doubt is it always helps to be able to point to a viable alternative. But remember, what they can show is, well, look, when he got in there, there was an intruder who was restraining his wife and had a knife. It wasn't his knife, it was the intruder's knife. He shot the intruder while he was, at least arguably, attacking his wife or on his wife against her wishes. Now, again, whether he would have known that through the catfishing scheme is a different issue, but that'll be for the state to talk about. And then this gets us into the third part of the defense, which is there may be lacking here enough evidence to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. The blood may be consistent with moving a body, but it's not consistent, perhaps, the argument will be, with a stabbing. The final thing I think is going to be interesting is whether they can really connect the dots that the defendant actually possessed the devices when the texts were sent. Because if they can't do that, now the jury's free to accept whatever evidence the judge is going to tell them to accept, but that could be part of that other issue on the absence of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, and it's Julianne. That Julianne is the one that says they took her computer to correspond with Joseph Ryan. Joseph Tully, right. What's the defense?
I have to agree with my colleague here. I don't think that they have a better defense other than what he just stated. So the main weakness of the prosecution is that they gave a sweetheart deal to somebody who, by their own theory, is a terrible person, did a terrible thing. So you attack that person, you say, look, they got a deal, they're not to be trusted, the government gave the deal to the wrong person here, my client's innocent. They do have to stick very, very close to Mr. Banfield's exculpatory, explanation that he gave to the police that night, because a bad alibi is worse than a good confession. So an alibi that doesn't check out, you have no more credibility. Whereas with a confession, you can at least argue that it was forced, coerced. You still have some options there. So an alibi that's destroyed will leave you with a guilty verdict. So they have to stick basically as close as possible to his statement that he gave to police.
Robert, bottom line, do you think he has a chance?
I mean, I think with a jury, they're making the decision. There's always a chance, but I think it's going to be a tough road because there are going to be a lot of questions they're going to ask about the conduct leading up to it, which suggests they knew exactly what was going to happen before it happened. Otherwise, they wouldn't have reacted the way they did, and they should have sent the daughter away saying, hey, well, pair, take the daughter away, call 911 if they were concerned about an intruder. Well, the reason they acted the way they did was because with her with the lookout, they knew what was going on. So I think that's something the jury may be scrutinizing very carefully.
Absolutely. All right, the evidence is, thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy your weekend. Evidence against Brendan Banfield is mounting. We'll have to see how this plays out. A lot of inconvenient facts for the defendant. I'm Ted Rowlands. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.